Good morning and welcome to the U.S. Attorney's Office. My name is Tessa Gorman. I'm the first Assistant United States Attorney for this office, but today I'll be acting as the acting U.S. Attorney for this matter. It is my great pleasure to welcome our city leaders to the office today, Mayor Harrell, City Attorney Davison, and Chief Diaz, who in partnership with the community have achieved the significant results that are the basis for this action today. And I'm so grateful that we are joined today by Kristen Clarke, the Assistant Attorney General for the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. She's here to discuss this significant milestone about the ongoing, yet longstanding progress of longstanding reform with the Seattle Police Department. Assistant Attorney General Clarke has devoted her career to public service and to upholding the civil rights of all Americans. She started her career as a lawyer in the Department of Justice for the very division that she's now leading. She also spent time at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, was the head of the Civil Rights Bureau for the New York State Attorney General's Office, and served as the president and executive director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. We are thrilled that Assistant Attorney General Clarke rejoined the Department of Justice in 2021 and are delighted to have her here with us today. Now I give you Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clarke.
Good morning, and thank you, First Assistant Gorman. While the Justice Department is opening new pattern or practice investigations into police departments across the country, we're also achieving significant progress in cities that have worked for years to institute reforms that are called for by our consent decrees. I am here today to recognize the significant steps that the City of Seattle and the Seattle Police Department have taken to ensure constitutional policing. They have reached and sustained compliance with our consent decree by consistently implementing reforms necessary to change policing in this city. As a result, Seattle stands as a model for the kind of change and reform that can be achieved when communities, police departments, and cities come together to repair and address systemic misconduct. Today, the Justice Department and Seattle, in recognition of these achievements, are filing a joint motion seeking to end the long-standing consent decree that has been in place. This would be replaced with a new agreement that addresses the need for compliance in two final remaining areas: officer accountability and police crowd control tactics. We will work closely with the city and the public on these final areas, but the overall message today is that policing in Seattle looks dramatically different today than it did 10 years ago. The consent decree in Seattle has provided the strong medicine necessary to cure the problems and improve the way policing is carried out across the city of Seattle. Over the last 11 years, policing has changed significantly, and we are confident that the systems the city has built, including robust community oversight, will ensure that policing in Seattle continues to improve in the road ahead. How did we get here? Under the consent decree, the city and the police department have implemented new and revised policies and developed and improved training to protect the civil rights of people of Seattle. Structural changes that improve the police department's ability to monitor and correct itself, including the creation of a force investigation team to investigate all serious uses of force, have been effectively implemented. And to foster a greater partnership between the police department and the community, the city has established a community police commission to incorporate and build on community members' ideas and experiences. The consent decree was established in 2012 as a result of the Justice Department's 2011 report, finding that the Seattle Police Department had engaged in a pattern and practice of police misconduct. In a little over a decade, the Seattle Police Department has made great strides and reformed its policies and practices significantly. The consent decree has produced real and tangible change. In 2011, we found widespread uses of unnecessary and excessive force. Today, the use of force has become rare. SPD officers now use force in fewer than 1/4% of all events to which they respond. SPD has reduced the use of serious force by 60%. In 2011, we found that officers escalated situations unnecessarily, particularly during encounters with people with mental illness. Since then, the police department has developed an advanced crisis intervention program to respond to people who are experiencing a mental health crisis. Use of force in crisis incidents now occurs in less than 2% of such incidents, and the majority of force used, 65%, is low-level force. In 2011, we raised serious concerns about the police department's practices concerning pedestrian stops and detentions. Today, the police department's stops and detentions consistently comply with legal and policy requirements. In its most recent assessment, the court monitor has found that more than 90% of police stops are supported by reasonable, articulable suspicion. The police department has also adopted a bias-free policing policy. It requires the police department to analyze its practices, including stops, searches, and arrests, to identify those that have a disparate impact on Black, Latino, AAPI, Native, and other communities of color. I want to be clear, while challenges remain, the very significant progress that I have described could not have been achieved without the reforms called for by our consent decree, the work of the independent monitor, court oversight, the actions undertaken by the police department, and the partnership and faith that the community has brought to this process at every stage. It is this measurable progress that forms the basis for our joint request to terminate the long-standing consent decree in Seattle. As the court monitors reports have consistently found, through its diligent efforts, the city has sustained compliance with significant portions of the consent decree since early 2018. And this is what the consent decree demands. The city must show that not only can it achieve compliance with the protection of constitutional rights required by the decree, but that it can also sustain that compliance over time to ensure that constitutional rights will be protected in the future. For the vast majority of the consent decree, the city and the police department have met these requirements. They've also committed to continuing to measure whether these reforms remain effective, demonstrating their commitment to being an agency that can engage in critical self-analysis and continue the ongoing process of reform. We believe that now is the time to recommend to the court that the city be relieved from the specific requirements of the consent decree in all of these areas of sustained compliance. Two key areas would remain under the court's oversight. The first area is the use of force in crowd management settings, such as large protests and demonstrations. The city continues to complete its review and implement reforms related to the use of force during the protest in the summer of 2020, and that work must be completed before it's appropriate to fully end court oversight on that issue. The second issue concerns accountability, the systems that ensure that police officers are held accountable if and when they violate policies and the law. In 2019, the court found that the city was out of compliance with the consent decree in this area, and the court monitor must conclude its assessment of the city's work to address those concerns. We are committed to working with the city and the court monitor to ensure that these remaining areas are fully addressed. But moving forward, the city, the police department, and the community will have to work together to ensure that policing both keeps people safe and respects their civil and constitutional rights. The gains the city and the police department have made must be vigilantly guarded and carried into the future. And we are confident that the systems established through the consent decree will make positive and lasting change possible. And while much has been achieved here in Seattle, we know that the work of reform must continue. Indeed, it is Seattle's recognition of the ongoing nature of reform and its commitment to doing the necessary work that gives us confidence that we can take this step today. We're seeing similar results in consent decrees across the country. The work in those cities is still ongoing, but the progress that we've accomplished in Seattle truly provides a model for what we can accomplish in other communities as we vigorously pursue such reforms. 2 weeks ago, I was in Louisville, Kentucky, where I announced the findings from a similar investigation of the police department in that city. We are already working with the city to address the issues through a court-enforceable consent decree with the oversight of a court monitor. We're also investigating the Minneapolis Police Department, Phoenix Police Department, Louisiana State Police, and the New York City Police Department, among others. The results of the consent decree here in Seattle show these efforts can be effective, that constitutional and effective policing go hand in hand. Today is not an endpoint, but a new beginning, a beginning of the next chapter of reform here in Seattle. As Dr. Martin Luther King said, change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability, but comes through continued struggle. The next chapter will require continuous struggle to ensure that change does roll in, to ensure that the constitutional rights of everyone in Seattle are protected, particularly among those most vulnerable. We look forward to our role in the next chapter of reform. To all of the members of the Seattle community, I acknowledge your engagement and hard work and effort which helped bring us to this milestone today. I know that this transition agreement doesn't signal an end to those robust efforts and that more progress can be made toward an even more effective and fair community policing process here in Seattle. In conclusion, I want to acknowledge the U.S. Attorney's Office, which has been a strong partner with the Civil Rights Division since the inception of our work in Seattle and throughout the consent decree process. I also want to acknowledge Mayor Bruce Harrell, City Council President Deborah Juarez, and the other City Council members here today, and Chief of Police Adrian Diaz. Thank you for joining with us. Thank you for standing with us. We are also joined by community leaders and concerned citizens who have been a central part of this process from the very beginning and have been important voices in the process of reform. I also want to recognize the Seattle Police Department, from the rank and file all the way up to the command staff. Their compliance with the consent decree over the years has contributed to its ultimate success. I want to now invite to the podium Mayor Bruce Harrell.
Got to stimulate that clap sometimes. Thank you, Ms. Clarke. And I want to once again thank members of the Community Police Commission and our president of the NAACP and everyone here and everyone's listening for this work we're doing today. It's indeed my honor. By the way, a Harvard graduate as well. Stop bragging about it. We grew up together. But if you look at the backgrounds of the people doing this kind of work, they've literally spent a lifetime protecting civil rights. And it's very important that we recognize that people in this world of accountability, they just didn't wake up and decide it matters. They spent a lifetime protecting people, and I think that's why March 28th, 2023 is such an important day. As mayor, I've repeatedly said in other forums that our highest charter responsibility is delivering constitutional policing and effective public safety to every person in every neighborhood. Every person in every neighborhood. The filing today represents another step toward that goal. And as mayor, I couldn't be more proud of our police department and our community, our leadership, my administration, on making sure this work is being done. Quite frankly, you've heard me say in the city before, there's no substitute for hard work. And that's what it took to get us to where we are today. When we advocated for a consent decree over a decade ago, it was with knowledge that we could do better, we could be better. We needed to do better on what we saw. And there are many people that did not believe that at the time. The joint announcement with the DOJ recognized the sustained compliance with the consent decree's requirements on the use of force, crisis intervention, stops and detentions, and supervision. For example, as said by Ms. Clarke, the use of force by our officers is very rare, occurring less than 1% of all police encounters with the public. And according to the federal monitor, 99% of all uses of force are consistent with SPD policy, a standard that exceeds constitutional requirements. As outlined in the agreement, and if approved by Judge Robart, let me say that, we're in the federal. If approved by Judge Robart, we must continue to demonstrate that our police accountability system is sustainable, effective, meaningful, fair, responsive to the people of Seattle. We must also further revise SPD's crowd management policies as stated by Ms. Clarke, last approved by the court in 2021. The federal monitor will continue to assess the city's ongoing work in these remaining areas. The federal monitor will work closely with the Office of Inspector General for Public Safety to prepare for the OIG to accept, assuming the monitor's assessment role. To ensure that this is successful, I am authorizing an additional 3 staff positions, staff specialists, to OIG. The progress that our department, SPD, has made and today's announcement would not be possible without the kind of One Seattle collaborative approach that's been fostered over a decade. We've been working hard when we were on the council, as mayor, city leaders, the OPA, OIG, and the CPC. And I want to recognize Gino Betts for being here. Thank you very much, sir, in your role in accountability. Your life experience, your intellect, and your commitment to this work has proven itself since you've arrived here in Seattle. Thank you. Now, we know that there remains work to be done to reduce racial disparities in policing. Let's not mince words there. And we're committed to being what I described as SPD as a learning, growing organization with a police department culture where accountability, continuous improvement, and innovation are always at the center. Quite candidly, in simple terms, every human being must recognize their own biases in whatever they do, whether you're a police officer, a mayor, whatever you do. That is a learning organization. To help our efforts to reduce disparities in policing, we will ask the Department of Justice and other subject matter experts, including those closest to the problem, for technical assistance. We're not afraid to ask for assistance. That is how we will get better as a city, as a department. So here in Seattle, when the community comes together and works with our police officers, we're showing what reform looks like. We put these words into action. That with a clear and demonstrated commitment, it is possible day to day to build a better police department. That's what the heart and the essence of One Seattle is all about. I'll close by saying that I teased this young man here that we actually went to grade school together, 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade together, high school together. He was my quarterback, this guy. We used to talk about these issues when we were young, people of color in the city of Seattle. How do we get a better police department? How do we build trust? Another president of the NAACP. This is historic. This is big stuff we're filing today. And I'm proud to be with my colleagues in doing this. And I think from here, I think I introduce our city attorney, who will inspire you even more in this great work we're doing. City Attorney Ann Davison.
I will be brief because many of the comments, as we've heard from Assistant Attorney General Clarke and from Mayor Harrell, have been highlighted. Today's filing is a joint motion. It is to recognize the work that has been done by SPD through the consent decree process, and it is also an opportunity to recognize that there are still work to be done. As highlighted by Assistant Attorney General Clarke, there are 2 more matters that still will be in review with the court monitor and the judge. We will be looking at the legal framework to address the areas that is laid out in the compliance agreement. If the court approves of the agreement, then it will close out the requirements in the consent decree that SPD has completed and put in its place new requirements focused on those 2 areas that have been identified by the monitor and the court. The proposed compliance agreement achieves the right balance because it recognizes the great strides that SPD has made, while also ensuring that SPD continues to improve in these 2 areas. Ultimately, it is the court that will decide how to move forward in serving its important oversight role. I anticipate that the court will closely review the submission filed by the parties today, again in this joint motion that we made on behalf of the city and the Department of Justice. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and just want to say thank you for the accountability partners being here. I know that as we transition, if the court does approve us releasing ourselves out of the consent decree, our work will continue. And to Director Judge, Director Betts, and CPC, your commitment to our efforts is essential. And for the sustainability of this department, really making sure that we provide equitable and constitutional policing. I really want to thank the men and women of the Seattle Police Department. If you think about 11 years, and I was an officer at the time, that many of our officers now today know nothing different other than the consent decree. And their exceptional work of really being able to be part of a learning organization, to really adjust and change and evolve through policies, through practices, through training, to making sure that we are on the cutting edge of what we need to do as a police department. It is their hard work that helps us get us to this point. It is that community's commitment to making sure that we provide equitable and compassionate policing. And we still have a long road ahead. But as we focus our efforts on making sure that we're always continuously improving and innovating in our work, that is what our commitment is too. If I look at over the course of our career, 11 years, especially even the last 11 years, we've had a lot of transition, a lot of change. In the last 3 years, we lost 525 officers. But when you start to look at even some of the numbers that we saw last year, we made more arrests than we had when we had full staffing. And we actually reduced our use of force by drastic numbers from even 2015 by 48%. And even if our numbers, if we went back to the very front end of the consent decree, by 60%, our officers reduced use of force. We reduced our complaints just in the last 4 years by almost half. So our officers are making sure that they're doing it in a professional and equitable manner. That doesn't mean that we still have complaints. We still have other things that we need to improve on, but their work is exceptional. And even if we actually look at even some of the things that we see violent crime going up, last year we actually made the second amount of gun recoveries, the second most amount of gun recoveries than we've ever had. And that is, again, to their commitment to wanting to make sure that the city is safe. And I think as I look at to the mayor, you know, first thing he did, he came into the very first day and said, public safety is our #1 priority. And we have to make sure that we are providing the best policing. And that is really what our commitment is to doing. And we've always had that commitment, but really now having that level of support from, you know, obviously the Department of Justice, in the monitoring team, the city attorney, our accountability partners, we still have a little bit of road ahead, but this is not a ceiling. this is a floor for us to really continuously improve and innovate. So thank you. I appreciate it.
So we have time for a few questions. Chris.
Chief, you just mentioned the staffing shortages. That's been an issue in slowing reforms in Chicago. It's been mentioned here by the Federal Monitor as well as the Judge Robart that could be an issue with full compliance. How do you think that potentially is slowing full compliance here in the city of Seattle going forward?
You know, we're actually seeing a lot of work in reduction of use of force. We're seeing a reduction in how we address, crisis intervention. So a lot of our officers are taking hold to the policies and practices. It's really putting a stress test. 2020 put a lot of stress tests on the overall consent decree to see how it operates. And we've actually had developed stronger partnerships with our accountability partners. As we get up more staffing, I think that'll actually improve our chances to really excel at what we're doing. And I think, again, most of our young officers, this is all they know. And so I think actually this is actually a good time for us to really build upon all the efforts that we've done over the last decade.
Natalie?
Question for the mayor, actually. Can you just talk about the financial investment the city of Seattle has made in this endeavor and talk about why you think that number that goes is so just worth it this time?
Standing a little flat-footed on that question because I don't have the data right in front of me. I will tell you that it took, and I just don't have the exact numbers, but say again.
200 million, I believe.
Oh, give me a leading question. So how much?
200 million.
200 million over the course of the last 10, 11 years. $200 million. Well, the way I look at it is it a cost, is it expense, or is it an investment? It's an investment. That whether it's 200 million or any other amount, as I said in my words, our charter responsibility is constitutional policing. So we look at it as an investment in our city, keeping everyone safe, keeping our businesses safe. And so, again, I do look forward to saving money, if that's a possibility, but we'll continue to invest because this is not a victory lap in the sense that we're saying we've won. What we're saying is we're looking at the data, we're looking at the numbers and said it was an investment, a financial investment. It was an emotional investment for many of us as well. And so, again, many of you know the budget shortfall we had, but we know that through a consent decree, we made these investments and it's paying off. This is a journey, and I need to say this, to sort of, I appreciate actually the question. This is a journey. And there's not a line that you cross. When we see, for example, what happened in Memphis on January 27th, a 29-year-old person was brutally killed. When we see that, we look across the country, I was most proud because the rank and file joined us in detesting that deplorable behavior. That's an investment into the hearts and minds of people, the policies, everything we need to do it. So it was a good investment, and I stand behind it. $200 million, in case anyone didn't know that. Ms. Clarke.
And I would just add that many of those costs are one-time investments that have resulted in the creation of new systems, new databases, new policies that have really made Seattle's police department a model for other law enforcement agencies across the country to follow. And indeed, there are police departments from across the nation and globally that are studying and looking at the changes and reforms that have been put in place here. So a very wise investment.
Could you just talk about the next steps specifically, especially the timeline and the next steps? You referenced an assessment by the monitor for especially in the 2 remaining areas to achieve compliance, so we understand what's next.
So as noted, our agreement is subject to approval by the judge. If approved, we will focus attention on the 2 remaining areas and would expect that we'll achieve compliance with those remaining areas in the next several months.
I can take a couple more, Matt.
Just kind of follow up on that question. Judge Robart, as you know, has been, sometimes he has no boundaries, he goes off the cuff, and how confident are you that Judge Robart will accept this, as well as what should we call the two remaining areas? If we're not saying this is no longer a consent decree, what are these two remaining areas? An agreement, a mini consent decree? What is that?
Yes. Very important questions. We are filing a joint motion to the court where we believe we have laid out a very compelling and well-substantiated case that makes clear that the city has achieved substantial compliance with the consent decree that's been in place for over a decade. If approved, this will bring an end to the consent decree that's been in place, and it will instead be replaced with a narrow transition agreement that focuses on two outstanding areas concerning accountability and crowd control management tactics. But our effort today is to bring to an end the long-standing consent decree that's been in place in Seattle, given the significant progress that's been achieved through the work of the community, the police department, and the city for over 11 years.
Mike, and then Graham, and then we'll stop.
I have a question about the monitor. Has the city or the DOJ been in touch with the monitor about this motion and how he may accept this joint motion? I mean, you've been working closely with Dr. Optali for a while. He knows it.
We rely on the work of the monitor and the submission that is presented to the court. And we will now look to the judge to review, respond, and hopefully approve the requests that we have made.
Graham, and then we'll close out. Thanks.
Chief, a question for you. What would it mean to your department if indeed the consent decree is lifted? What would you be able to do that you can't do?
You know, I think actually it allows us to make adjustments to policy in a quicker manner. It allows us to work with community in a manner, because right now you will have, say, if we're going to look at a use of force policy, it can take sometimes up to a year going through many different stages of review and policy and working with that adjustment. And I think now this would allow us to be a little bit more responsive, a little bit more nimble in the ability to be able to adjust things. And so that's what we hope for. We continue to work on a lot of that. There'll still be a connection of making sure that we're constantly working with our accountability partners. OIG as being a good partner in the sense of even with our crowd management stuff, we've done the Sentinel review. We've actually added many of those recommendations from the Sentinel review, such as our POET, our public outreach engagement teams. And so it allows us to be able to adjust and try things out in a much quicker manner.
Thank you.